This is an extract from an article written by a columnist and public affairs commentator, Iliyasu Gadu. He joins us in the studio to discuss the implication of insecurity on agriculture, especially in the northern part of the country. Good morning, and it's good to have you, Janice.
Yeah, good morning. How are you?
And we're doing
Looking
great.
good.
All right, great to have you. Now, there's been quite a lot, going on, particularly in the northern part of the country. There's this effort by federal government to diversify the economy, and the sector looked upon as the most promising is the agricultural sector, but insecurity has made that to kind of have some kind of delays and a negative impact on all of that. Why do you think we're experiencing this, and how can we move forward from this?
Well, good morning, viewers. I'm glad to be here. I want to take us back to the commencement of this administration. President Buhari came with three major planks of his administration, and agriculture was one of them. Diversifying the economy and bring up the agricultural potentials of the country. And of course, when we talk about agriculture, we're basically talking about North. Of course, the country itself, there are agricultural potential all over the country, but most prominently it's in the North because of the large expanse of the land, because of the arable land, because of the availability of all kinds of crops to be cultivated and to help the food security in the country, as well as provide the basis for agro-allied industrial takeoff. And it was commendable, and of course we had quite a lot of pronouncements regarding what needs to be done or what would be done to make sure that agriculture becomes the bedrock or one of the main contributors of Nigerian economy. In fact, if you remove oil, the next most important contributor to the Nigerian economy is agriculture. Not just because of the food we eat, but also the potentials in terms of what we can grow to be able to export in terms of food, in terms of the value added to agriculture. So agriculture worldwide is one of the most important industries in the world because of the beneficial effects across several phases of life. So when President Buhari came and made agriculture to be one of the main planks of his administration, it drew a lot of applause, especially in the North. And of course, people were looking forward to see what could be done, what would be done to ensure that this becomes, becomes into fruition. And of course, a few years into his administration, we saw quite a few, policy, changes, policy guidelines towards making agriculture, what he promised it to be. And of course, around that time, there were quite a few, some positive developments regarding agriculture. The output went up and all kinds of things. But now, we are seeing a reversal of that. And the reversal is not just about, some of the implements not getting, some of the, inputs not getting to the farmers, but also the incidence of insecurity. Now, insecurity has become so serious in some parts of Nigeria, some parts of the North especially. People don't go to farms in Katsina, Zamfara, and a few other places, Sokoto. So these are the food agricultural producing areas of the North, and Nigeria is a lot of it. And they have been devastated by the insecurity. Farmers can't go to the farms. And also, the bandits who have taken refuge in the rural areas have made it almost impossible for farmers to go and cultivate their farms for fear of being attacked, for fear of being, killed, and all that. So this has contributed towards, the problems that we face in agriculture in the North. And it itself, it's something to to worry about, because first of all, one of the main planks of the administration is not being achieved. Secondly, the people have to grapple with insecurity. Agriculture is the bedrock of the rural economy, and People, if the people cannot farm, cannot cultivate their crops, then you are creating a problem for the urban, because they are going to move to the urban areas and constitute a problem, social problem in the urban areas. And if they have to, if insecurity again becomes a burden on them, now that again is a double jeopardy.
Right.
So really, it's something that we have to, consider, and the government has to consider while it faces the insecurity issue in the country, especially in the north.
Now, in your article, The North on a Pedestal does not only highlight the issue of insecurity in the north. What other aspects does your article contain?
No, I'm looking at, by virtue of, when we look at the geographical composition of Nigeria, the area called the Northern Region, the former Northern Region, which comprises about 19 states now, is virtually about more than 1/3 of the country, landmass. And a good, number of people live, the population of the country also, live, a very high percentage of the population of the country live within the northern Nigeria. And also, northern Nigeria has played a very, very prominent part in political developments in this country. It has always been something you can call the anchor, the stabilizer of politics in Nigeria. Where issues become, problematic, the North is always there to provide the anchor, to provide the moderation, to provide the direction. It may not be doing that in form of ideas, but what it does is to provide the seeming stability where political decisions will be taken. But now, the North, by virtue of insecurity, by virtue of political, political recession, so to speak, is now taking a second backseat, and that really has to do with the developments in northern Nigeria, and that and the north has now become something of it's really not where it should be.
Now a lot of people have attributed this to the lack of presence of governance. In other words, ungoverned spaces in many of these rural places, which is why it's much easier for criminals to thrive in those areas, perpetrate their activities and go scot-free. Some have said, look, you have situations where bandits even attack villages on camels, on horses. They operate for hours and no response from the security agencies and all of that. What are we doing to make the presence of governance in those local areas more visible?
Well, I don't know how old you are, but when I was growing up, we knew that the local government, the local authorities in the north were very, very strong and very effective because they had, they had the sense, the power, they had the authority to govern those areas, the rural areas. In fact, the bedrock of northern Nigeria at that time was the native authorities, because they provided the security, they provided the guidance, they provided, the direction. And, the typical northern local authority or native authority is well maintained because they had their own sources of revenue and their own means of ensuring that security and other aspects of life are maintained effectively. If you happen to be a stranger within any of the localities, your presence is known, your presence is felt. And the local authorities were on top of all developments within the localities because they were well funded and well taken care of. But with the advent of the political, dispensation, there were of course, there was a lot of local government reforms and all that intended to make the local governments more effective. But what we see is that the patronage system, which gives a lot of power to the center and also by extension to the state governments, because after the regions were broken, you now had states in their stead. So the states now took over the functions of what the regions used to do. So what the northern region, for instance, based in Kaduna, used to do, it was now delegated to the states that were newly created states. And the beginning of the recession of the local governments started from there. Because then decisions about local governments were not taken at the local level, but at the state level. And so the power started shifting from the local government to the state government. And when we came to have the full-fledged political dispensation, it became something of a patronage. The governor sitting where he is, and his cronies around the state capital decide things for the local government. And then gradually you begin to have a situation where the local authorities were handicapped. They couldn't do what they should do to be able to take care of situations that arise within their localities. They had to go to the state government or to the Ministry of Local Government or Bureau of Local Government, all kinds of bureaucratic setups to manage the local governments without the input of the local government. So what happens is that decisions that ought to be taken in situ now had to be referred to the headquarters, which is the state capital. And before these decisions, the feedback from those decisions, gets to the local government. The gap becomes something of a problem. And then, of course, we also have the fact that the population was growing. And, most of the population in the rural areas were not taken care of. In those days, the local government were taking care of the schools, the markets, the hospitals, the health centers and all that. They were effectively doing that. Now, all this is no longer with the local governments don't even function in those respects again. So what we have is, as the local government, becomes ineffective, non-state actors started going into getting into the vacuum.
Right.
Now, what will it take, as a follow-up to that, what will it take to get these local governments and local rural communities function in the picture in which you just painted now?
No, I think the problem has become so serious enough that even Mr. President recently, I think, signed part of what it's included in the executive order, in which he at least is trying to restore the power, the autonomy that local government should enjoy under the Constitution. And they can't do this without funding, because the funding is the critical critical factor in the whole thing. Being able to attend to those needs at that very level. In those days, there used to be called Endoka, the local policemen. The local policemen were very effective with just a baton, without even weapons. They could go into any ward, any area of the local government and fish out criminal elements and fish out undesirables. And the moment somebody or some group tries to make any issue or try to raise some insecurity or whatever, they will be fished out and they will be dealt with according to the law at that level. So it wasn't something that had to go to the states. But now, with all these happenings, what we need is to go back again, because we left what we are doing effectively to something that is not feasible. So we need to go back, yes, because it is what should be the beginning of trying to get authorities, the authority and effective authority at that level. Because without it, we cannot all go and stay in the cities. A lot of the economy, rural economy, is very, very important to our lives. So we need to be able to go back, and we need to do that in a concerted way. The federal government and the state governments have a key role to play in this matter. They need to get down and look at what really should go to the local governments and give it to them. And then where there needs to be supervision, they need to supervise. But they must not let the government at that level continue to aberrate, because at the end of the day, the problem of insecurity is going to germinate into more and more issues, and we're not going to be able to resolve it. So I think the best thing to do is for a concerted action. Traditional rulers could come in, because they have a bottoms up approach to the issue. The Sultan, for instance, the traditional rulers of the northern Nigeria, should come into the matter, because we're talking about a level of government that is practically non-existent at the moment, and that is why these things are happening at that level. Because if we had those effective authority of the local government at that level, we wouldn't be having this. Even if we have it, it will be to the level that can be managed and be, be stopped. But right now, we don't have those things, and it's getting worse. By the time it gets to the point where we cannot go to our local governments, we cannot travel between the towns and the cities, or between towns and towns, because along the line, there are local governments.
Okay. Now, because of this crisis, bedeviling the North, you mentioned in your article that southern political elites are using this as a mantra to succeed power in 2023. Do you think they're going to do any better?
Well, it's not a question of whether they're going to do any better. But the issue is, when you have a region of the country that has been the bedrock of stability, itself insecure, looking very unlike what it used to be, and with all the coterie of officials, coterie of top people, statesmen, unable to get their hands on it for one reason or the other. Then, of course, in Nigeria, the whole thing is about political, competition. And whereas the North has always been the stabilizing factor in Nigerian politics, today the North itself is in need of stabilization. Then, of course, the other people who are competing with the North are going to say, oh, well, look, you're not what you used to be. You're not what you say you are. So because of that, you now become a target, a legitimate target for political competition. And that's what's happening, because at this moment, the North does not even have the courage, does not even have the courage to bring out leaders that would say, look, yes, while these things are happening, we have been able to do this, and we want to carry it on to the next level. It's just a matter of physician heal thyself, and if the physician cannot heal himself, so who is he to say anything to you become a legitimate target for political sniping by your competitors and by your supposed enemies, in this respect, the southern political elite.
Now, do you see this whole happenings, these recent realities, the insecurity, the lack of governance, I would say that the absence of governance at the rural level and all of that, as a pointer to the need to revisit the conversation about Nigeria's federalism, to perhaps have a review of the federal structure that is currently operating in Nigeria? Do you see this as a pointer to it?
Well, my problem with people who talk about, true federalism, there's no false federalism. And for that matter, there's nothing like true federalism if you want to talk about it in those respects. A country or a federal structure, determines the kind of federalism that suits its purposes. For instance, America is a federal setup. Its federalism differs from what obtains in Australia, and that of Australia differs from what obtains in Germany. These are federal setups, federal republics. So everybody does the kind of federalism that suits itself. Now, in the First Republic, out of the political evolution, political happenings of the First Republic, or events before leading to the First Republic, we saw the need to create a federal system where, of course, we had regions based on regions. Then we had the northern region, the western region, the eastern region, and eventually the southwest region. Now, it's all part of trying to see how we can decentralize. And the constitution of those days helped to, undergird, the system we had. Now, of course, some people said there was, it was not good for unity, that we shouldn't have one area of the country, where we have, virtually the setups then were like states within the states, and people felt it didn't go well with the need for unity, and so they took actions, of course, violent actions, and they tried to unify the country, and of course, it set the stage for subsequent developments, and we ended up having states. From the 4 regions, we ended up having 12 states, and subsequently more and more states. Agitations came up. Now, the basic principle of federalism is about, devolving powers to federating units. Some call them regions, some call them provinces, some call them states. But the most important thing is to make sure there is a balance in all in the country, so that there won't be a concentration of power. I think we've managed it well, but the issue here in this country, it's not about the system, it's about the actors. The actors are the ones who have a winner-takes-all mentality, and they don't do what they're supposed to do. And that's why we have problems, issues with our federal setup. It's not about the system itself or whether it's working or not. It's about the people who make it work. You can't have democracy without Democrats. And if we want to have a federal system, we need to have people who believe and who want the federal system to work. So that's why, what we have today, there's nothing wrong with it. The setup we have there's nothing wrong with it.
You mentioned earlier, that there's some sort of over-centralization of power at the center, and the concept of federalism that some of the experts, public commentators have spoken about, is where you have subnationals strengthening the center as opposed to the center now trying to strengthen the subnationals. So some said that that's what is currently obtainable in Nigeria and is not sustainable. How would you respond to those lines of arguments?
No, I did say earlier on the setup we have, the basic principle, nothing wrong with it. It's the actors. It's the actors. For instance, the state governments are executives in their right. They have their powers recognized by the Constitution. They have they also share some powers with the federal government. Now, but a situation whereby the same state governors that are accusing the federal setup or the center of being overbearing over them also practice the same thing in their states, locations. This, it's not the problem of the system or the structure, but the problem of the individual.
How can we get more money to the rural communities? For instance, some have raised issues about the sharing formula, for instance, where the federal government takes the highest percentage and all of that. And you have states and then the local governments. But some will expect, or I would say in an ideal federal system, you would expect that the local level have the higher percentage of the revenue derivation and all of that. So how would you reconcile this?
No, first of all, the revenue formula we have now is not meant to be cast in stone. It is meant to be a beginning, a beginner. Let's start with this, and then subsequently we begin as we go along. We review it, because you don't start with the perfect system or perfect setup at the beginning. As you move along, some of the issues you observe in the practice of the setup you are having, you need to look at them again, tweak it, and say, look, we need to have this thing. We need to be able to give more powers where powers are needed, and then remove those where those powers are not needed, so that we have a balance. Because right now what we need to make the states to be self-sustaining to a very large extent, because there's a lot of potentials in the state. There's a lot of untapped resources, untapped potentials in the states. But because of the overbearing nature of the federal system, based on the center, based on revenue earning commodity oil, the states are not doing anything. So the states, for instance, a lot of the states can develop agriculture, can develop tourism, can develop industries. Some states have the potential to be industrial. In fact, the states should be the offshoots of the economic development of the country, with the federal government providing the necessary guidelines and policies and all that. So now that frees this federal government from taking decisions on what the states ought to do. But this, as I said again, is something that has to be done by people who believe in the system, who believe in practicing that, not people who want to be overbearing. The state governments who are asking for this, let's put them on the pedestal. Let's ask them, what have they done in their states? The same people who are asking the federal government, or who are tasking the federal government, about the need for the federal government to get off their backs are not getting off the backs of the local governments.
Okay, now like you said, it's the system. Our system is working, but it's the actors that are not doing what
Yes,
they're
very much so.
Who is responsible, for making them function as they are supposed to?
First of all, we have institutions. We have this system is supposed to be, it's supposed to have the executive. You're supposed to have the legislature and the judiciary, and you also have institutions like the parties. The political parties ought to come in, because it's not the job of one person. The federal government, if it decides to say, look at what President Buhari has done. He signed an executive order asking that the local governments be given the right to at least handle some of the finances. The people who are working against it are the state governors. He's also said there should be, some funding, independent funding for the judiciary. That is a willingness on the part of, we can criticize the President Buhari and the federal government, but that shows a willingness of devolving some of the power. Let's start from there. Then from there we can go up and begin to look at other things that needs to go to the states and to the local governments, because this is part of this is the structure of the constitution. So we need to go to that level. But the state governments are resisting. They are resisting this because they feel it's an assault on their power. Fine. But then what is the rest? Power is nothing without control. Power is nothing without responsibilities. So it's a concerted effort. We need to be able to move from one level to the next level. And the next level is getting needed constitutional changes to be able to effect this. And that is why the National Assembly and the judiciary to provide a legal framework, and the National Assembly to provide the enabling laws, and so that we can begin to devolve these things to the states and make the states to be functioning as they should.
All right. Now, let's take a look at the budget presentation yesterday. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari on Thursday presented the sum of 16.39 trillion naira as the 2022 budget proposal to a joint session of the National Assembly. The president, who addressed the session of lawmakers from both chambers, unveiled a crude oil benchmark price of $57 per barrel and a daily production estimate of 1.88 million barrels per day. Now, while giving a breakdown, the president said 768.28 billion naira is for statutory transfers, 6.83 trillion naira for non-debt recurrent expenditure, and 5.35 trillion naira for capital expenditure, while the 2022 budget deficit is projected at 5.20 trillion naira. Take a look at the clip from that presentation.
Rate. A total expenditure of 16.39 trillion naira is proposed for the federal government in 2022. The proposed expenditure comprises A, statutory transfers of 768.28 billion naira, B, non-debt recurrent costs of 6.8 trillion naira, and C, personnel costs of 4.1 trillion naira. D, pensions, gratuities, and retirees' benefits of 577 billion naira. E, overheads of 792.39 billion naira, and F, capital expenditure of 5.35 trillion naira, including the capital component of statutory transfers. G, debt service of 3.61 trillion naira, and H, sinking fund of 290.71 billion naira to retire.
The new year, the 2020 and 2021 appropriation bills were considered and passed before the end of each year. The distinguished and honored members of the National Assembly remain committed to working on the 2022 appropriation bill and pass it before the end of this year. Mr. President, the Nigerian economy and indeed our citizens are benefiting from the early passage and assent to the 2020 and 2021 appropriation bills now acts.
The House has passed several important resolutions relating to healthcare access, primary education, rural infrastructure deficits, and national security that require actual funding. Where these restrictions have not been included in the appropriation bill, the House will work with the Senate and the Executive to see that the final version of this appropriation bill includes necessary allocations to implement these resolutions and give full effect to the benefit.
All right, thank you for staying with us. This is Daybreak on Trust Television. Now, one aspect of that budget presentation that many have raised eyebrow over is the issue of the deficit of that budget and how it's going to be sourced. Basically, the expectation is it's going to be sourced from borrowing, and many people are saying, look, we have been borrowing. Borrowing, our debt profile at the moment compared to our revenue generation ratio, when you put that side by side, where are we lacking? How can we service this debt that we are just borrowing?
Well, intrinsically, debt is not a four-letter word. Every country lives on debt. In fact, our whole lives is predicated on debt. Debt for the air we breathe, for everything. So, and one day we're going to pay for it by dying.
Right.
But then it's what you live for. There are some who spend the whole of their lives, taking debt and not doing anything with the debt. Some people take the debt and do something with it and create something out of it so that other people will also benefit. Now, in the case of a country like Nigeria with so much resources, so much potential, it doesn't, we need to borrow, definitely. We need to borrow to finance, to develop, to settle a lot of things, a lot of social, political, economic, all kinds of things. We need to. But the issue is not the debt. The issue is what do you do with the debt? Now, if you are borrowing just to eat, practically to eat, what I mean eat in the Nigerian sense, you're not doing anything. You're not adding value to the debt. People borrow because they want to do something so that it will generate something that would now generate something, value to the debt. So in this case, it's very disturbing that every year in, year out, we are not able to close the gap between what we borrowed and what we are doing with what we borrowed. Because we are supposed to be borrowing to be financing development in the country, so that those things that we are spending the money on could create further basis for our economy to grow, and then we grow out of the debt that we have taken. But in this case, every year we borrow to finance the borrowing. So it's a circle, a vicious circle of borrowing, debt. At the end of the day, we cannot do but mortgage our economy and make our economy to be uncompetitive, to be an economy that is in perpetual uncertainty. And that is the problem. And that is why, a lot of Nigerians are raising issues about why we need to borrow. Every other day when you open the newspapers, you listen to the news, it's about Nigeria borrowing from this, borrowing from that, borrowing from IMF, borrowing from China, borrowing from internal sources, borrowing from this. We seem to be running a government of borrowing. And that's the problem, because when are we going to use those funds that we have borrowed for things? Now, the government will say we are doing infrastructure, fine. But will this infrastructure grow themselves out of the debt that they have been piled up? That is the question. Or we borrow just to pay salaries. We borrow just to do fanciful projects that really do not provide the basis for economic development. Now that is the lacuna, and that is what we should be worried about, because if subsequent government come and they cannot provide the services that we want or we need, or provide the background or the bedrock for economic development, that would be a serious issue, because Nigeria needs to develop. Nigeria needs to be able to get its economic acts together. It needs to borrow, but it needs to borrow responsibly, borrow so as to be able to target those areas that will give us the leverage for further growth, so as to be able to, provide the basis for economic development and to grow out of this. We have the potential. This is a country that can market itself anywhere.
Right.
But the marketing is what we have not been able to do.
Okay. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari, in his presentation, said defense and internal security will be given top priority. Do you think this will help curb the security situation we're having right now?
We've heard about that. We've heard about that. We've also heard about how the defense funds have been utilized, and it's not to our liking. We need to have accountability. Yes, we know we have insecurity, but some of these problems could be solved by proactive measures. It's not always that you have to apply, you have to apply weapons to the whole thing. There are a lot of proactive issues that you should do so that the issues do not become unmanageable. Then it will not become something for you to manage before it becomes multifaceted. And spending on defense has been quite something we've been doing for the past God knows when, and we've still not been able to turn the corner on defense and insecurity in the country, for which the money has been budgeted for.
Now, how important is spending on sectors that will guarantee revenue generation? For instance, we were talking about the agricultural sector, for instance, in terms of helping government generate more revenue. We know it's a major employer of labor, but because of the insecurity, we are not seeing much of that. So how critical is that sector, and how much of funding do we need in that sector to guarantee that we revive that sector to where it was?
In most countries of the world today, agriculture is the bedrock of those countries. First of all, you need agriculture for food security, which is very critical for a country like China, for instance, about 1 billion plus people. They don't import food. If they have to import, it is to add value to what they have. But basically, they have solved that problem. And the rural economy is also the bedrock of China's economy, because that is from where they get a lot of some of the inputs for agriculture, for agricultural, agro-allied, industries. And hey, look, agriculture it's a country like, for instance, Denmark or Netherlands. A great deal of the GDP they generate comes from agriculture. We have quite a lot. We have arable land to grow plantation, farming, to grow cotton, to grow coffee, to grow tea. These are things. We take coffee every day. We take tea every day. I mean, if you look at the total value, the value chain of agriculture is so enormous. Wheat, cassava, all these are things we could do to be able to grow the rural economy, and by extension, the economy add more to the GDP. Now, all this needs a concerted action, concerted economic action, backed by political will. Now, a situation where the agricultural potential of the country is facing insecurity, then you have not started, because then what you are going to have are things that will grow out of that insecurity, that neglect of that very sector, because the agriculture employs more people than the rest of than any other sector in Nigeria.
In view of the insecurity, there are some who have said that, look, for us to ensure the safety of farmers and for us to encourage more farmers to go into the farming, perhaps there is a need to look at the approach in which we do farming. It doesn't look like we've moved from the peasant kind of farming to the mechanized farming. That's where we are. And so some have said, look, why don't you bring these farmers together in clusters and then support them with machines or machineries, to be able to grow, to be able to, produce in large quantities and all of that. Would you say that will be a great changer?
No, well, the agricultural development, the trajectory of our agricultural development, especially during the colonial times, was to produce cash crops to service the colonial economy, the international economy. That's why we had things like cotton, tobacco, cocoa. They are all basically to provide, the colonial economy with something to process it abroad and bring it back here as finished products. Now, we have a challenge between providing cash crops and providing food crops. Now, and also making sure that we have the market for them. In that respect, we don't have a problem in terms of the market for the agricultural products, because apart from a huge market we have in Nigeria, we also have the West African market. Now, we need, of course, agriculture needs a lot of spending. You need to spend a lot. You need to be able to organize the farmers into rural cooperatives, rural areas, so that you provide them with all the inputs they need, as you rightly said. Provide them with settlement. Provide them with, basic things of life, so they don't have to leave that area, so that they don't have to leave that particular locality where they're doing their agriculture. They can concentrate in that particular locality and do farming in a satisfactory way with a large, with large plans, with plans that are very, very, huge plans, so that, because what we have here really in this country is just agriculture for subsistence, not really for real food, full-scale production, because there are a lot of potentials of agriculture that we have not even touched. We have not talked about the dairy aspect. We have not talked about the other aspects like processing. We have not talked about all these things. We are still at the level where agriculture is just basically subsistence. We need to we have huge lands unutilized. I mean, the distance, if you travel between here and Kaduna, which is a distance of about 2.5 hours, basically, there's huge land that is left untouched, unutilized. This has potential to provide huge agricultural, takeoff for the country, in terms of which we import, things from other countries. The things that we import from other countries are agriculture related. The milk that we import from other countries, the powdered or milk we import, the other type of milk we import, come from other countries, come from the agricultural industry of other countries. Why can't we do them here? We have herds of cattle, we have land for cattle, rearing cattle, animal farm production and all that. So all these things are things that we need to spend. The EU's budget on farming, on agriculture, is unbelievable because of the primacy, the importance of agriculture. We buy apple, all these things, you may think these are little things, but if you take a look at the totality of what we expend to be able to import these things into the country, it's enough to set up our own industries. And it's also, apart from the fact that we are going to have the value of agricultural inputs, we're also going to have the value of settling people in that area. We're going to have the virtue of the value of developing our agricultural potentials in terms of research and all that, so that to be able to get yields, we don't have to wait until it's the season of this before we can eat. We can grow varieties, agro-technical and all kinds of things. These are things. The entire value chain of agriculture is so vast. We have not even touched anything out of it.
Now, President Buhari, has justified, the reason for some of these borrowings, saying we borrowed our way through 2 recessions. Do you think that is justifiable?
I'm at a loss, really, because the truth about it is, well, as I said again, borrowing is not a 4-letter word, but it's what to do. Now, if you say you borrowed out of a recession, what really have you, what lessons have you learned? What concrete things have come out of the borrowing you've made? If you still borrow, if you borrowed out of recession and you still have a high inflationary, trend, you still, things are still expensive,
has not increased,
and you have not been able to, close the cycle on a number of economic issues, then you begin to ask yourself, is it borrowing really that is the issue? Or is it about other methods that you need to do to be able to domesticate the economic system? We have a lot of high capital flight in this country. That capital goes out of this country to go and come back in form of debt to us. The debt that we get from other countries actually come from the capital. that comes from this country. So why don't we plug those loopholes and ensure that, look, for instance, if you have to send your child abroad to go to school in any of the universities abroad, there has to be an education tax system. Okay, yeah, you are sending your child abroad to go to school in XYZ country. He has to pay. Since you have the money to pay for your child's school abroad, you must be able to pay here. So you must be able to say, okay, yes, I'm going to pay XYZ amount of money to educate my child in XYZ country. Then the government must make sure that that money that you're going to spend to improve another person's educational system, part of it comes here. So we begin to plug all these loopholes. Because when you borrow, and you borrow just to continue with the consumption habit and not to production habit, then the essence of the borrowing is defeated. And I cannot really see the connect, because what the president is saying about borrowing out of recession. You grow out of recession. No, not borrowing out of recession. You grow out of recession by producing more, by selling more, so that you now cut the deficits against other countries. And then, of course, you make your currency strong, so that people begin to buy more from you. Not to borrow to be able to pay salaries, so that you can fictitiously say you have grown out of recession, because you still have the issues of recession are still with you.
Right.
So I really don't see the connect there. But then he's the president, so let's give him maybe he has more, economic, indices and sense than. But for me, it's not something to really behold, because if you borrow just to finance to grow out of recession, I don't see the connect. You need to produce and grow out of recession. Then you know that yes, you're on the right track. Not to borrow, because you are actually, what you are doing is that, what it means in practice, in layman terms, is that, look, you are a drunkard and then you are drinking more, so that you get out of, you feel that you have. No, I'm not saying that Nigeria is a drunk country, by the way, but what I'm saying is that analogy, because when you have that kind of challenge, what you need to do is to find ways of plugging the loopholes, and then using the plugs that using the monies realized from the plugs, channel it into those areas that you have not, you have neglected, so that those areas will provide the spur for you to spring out of your problems. That is what needs to be done.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning and sharing your thoughts with us. We've been speaking with Iliyasu Gadu, public affairs commentator, talking to us about Nigeria's opportunities in agriculture sector and the 2022 budget. Thank you for coming.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah.